How do you like our name?
Beards and Fitness.
Yeah.
I feel like I shouldn't have shaved this weekend.
Yeah, it's a prerequisite to joining the podcast. Except all females, they get a exempt.
The free pass.
Yeah, free pass. No, it's good, man. Thanks for coming on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we got John Singleton.
Correct.
But you're not single, are you?
That is true. Straight in with a deep question.
I guess you had never heard that one before.
yeah, it's true.
Can you maybe give the listeners,
yes,
or myself and Joey as well, maybe
That's
a bit of context on you? You're a CrossFit coach. Would that be like if someone asked you, what do you do? Would that be your...
Yeah, especially in the last few years, I've become very specialised. So I'm purely working with CrossFit athletes. Right now, it's 100% of my work.
Yeah. And how did that journey start? Like, if you just go even back to when you just
back in the day.
Yeah, OG days.
OG. Well, before I was even CrossFit OG, I suppose my background was in martial arts. Like a kind of brief intro. Like I basically hated school. Was like my thing. Yeah, I know.
No, Joey's a teacher.
Oh, really? I found it.
He hates school too.
I hated school too. I like it now,
but yeah, it's just and I didn't get on. Basically, I kind of found martial arts through a bit of a story, but I had a martial arts teacher who was quite influential in my life, and that's all I wanted to do at that point. From about the age of 12, I'd say 12, 13. And mornings I'd be training, evenings I'd be training, and kind of just in this pursuit of martial arts, like quite single-minded. And people would tell you, like, I'm not very good at doing things by like half measures. And martial arts was one of those. I used to travel every weekend, and actually at an early age I started coaching alongside my teachers. And I was from like 16 or so, we'd be giving like weekend seminars and different things. But then at the age of 18 I moved to China.
Oh. And
I lived in China. It ended up being a year that I was there, but it's kind of like quite a hard experience, like especially it's over 10 years ago now, like 14 years ago. Wow.
Don't play younger than you are.
wow. So it's like 14 years ago, and basically it was like a really hard, culturally hard, language barrier hard, food hard, like just everything was hard, but I kind of felt like I needed to pursue through it, like it was a life that I was chosen.
Why did you move to China?
It was Chinese martial arts that I was studying. So it was kind of going to the soul of the martial arts, really, just to, I kind of thought, like a sense of that's what life was about, and that was its sole purpose. And so I just wanted to be there full time and be with kind of the originators of the art and various things. So I went to Beijing, and then I went to a very small province in Hunan and went to a school there. And basically no one spoke English. And it was quite rough. Like, it was winter there when I was there, and like you were sleeping in a room with like broken windows, and there was snow outside. It was pretty like rough style living, like no running water because all the pipes had frozen.
Wow.
And
that's some boot camp.
Yeah, it was pretty brutal. And it was definitely like an experience.
Yeah.
But I think eventually, basically, I kind of had just a realisation. It was kind of like life doesn't have to be this hard. And it was like a strange realisation to have. I was like, I'm like really punishing myself right now. It doesn't have to be this hard. But it's kind of at that time I made the decision that, I just wanted to help other people. And it's kind of like a strange like shift in my mindset that I made. And that took me back to England. And I started my degree in osteopathy. And it was actually during that time, so in like 2006 I started, and in like 2007 I started training CrossFit. And as I was saying at the weekend, like back then, like CrossFit was there was one gym in London, I think 4 gyms in the UK back then, and we were students, had no money, and so a friend basically got a kettlebell, and we'd go to the park, run 400 meters, swing the kettlebell 21 times, and lie on our backs, and that was about the structure of our training.
Yeah.
Or we'd sometimes we go into a Globo gym, and these days, we take over all the equipment and just move around. I think once we did filthy 50 and just ran between different stations and various things.
This is what, 2007, 8?
Yeah, 2007, 2008.
Yeah.
And we were a little training group, and at that time I was still studying, but as I'd said, CrossFit had very much merged the martial arts. I was no longer practicing martial arts.
Mm-hmm.
Went full time in CrossFit, full training. I wanted to be an athlete back then, and I went to 2009. They had the sectionals.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think 2009 they had the sectionals, which was kind of the competition before the Open. It was how you went through to European regionals then.
Yeah.
And I qualified that year individually from the UK. And that is that competition that Sam Briggs was there and all these names, back in the old days. And and then eventually, as the years went on, I still kept training, but I realised that I was never going to make the level that I wanted to be. I made it to team. I went with some teams again into regionals teams. But basically what would happen is, I started to realise that my physical potential wasn't as high as some of the people that I was seeing and working alongside. And then there was, it wasn't a one day to the next, but there was a transition into me. I'd start working with people instead of trying to compete against them. And then that started to transition. And all alongside, after my studies, I wanted to use, because it's a 4-year master's degree, so it's a long degree. So I kind of made sure that I wanted to use that. And so I went into clinical life, and I was there for 3 years in the outskirts of London, and basically working with doctors, orthopedic surgeons, different things. But I was still coaching, still training CrossFit, still working with CrossFitters, and then eventually, it just one thing kept leading to the other, and eventually I got into full-time coaching, and kind of treatment. The clinical side dropped off and the coaching side upped, which is kind of where we are today.
So the clinical side has completely disappeared for you, or do you still use what you learned?
Yeah, so they're very much into it. So I think the most beneficial part of the coaching is identifying the movement, being able to see movement. Spent hours looking at people move, and it's an extremely useful skill just to be able to spot in CrossFit. But we haven't completely lost it. So today, with Arna and Inga, there's things that may be beneficial to people that I can help with, but I don't have a typical clinic, and I won't take on patients as such because I can't be consistent with them. So I'll give advice and help out and maybe point people in a direction I think will be useful, but I don't have a set clinic type thing.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's, even your martial arts background as well, that's also a lot human movement. So
it's been in my life, it has been in my life for a significant number of years, and I think it's just where my first passion was. I think martial arts took me out of not a good place, and it was very beneficial for me, and so it's nice that I can use that vehicle to kind of help other people. Really, it's and I very much see it as that. I'm lucky enough to work with, run teen camps and work with teen athletes, and it's nice to see their development as well as the adult athletes. It would be quite boring if all you were doing was just improving movement, but you see kind of growth in lots of other areas, them developing through other aspects of their life, which is nice. I told you it was going to go deep straight away.
Yeah,
Awesome. That's what we like, right?
No, it's good. And now, what you're doing now is, you're both working with athletes kind of in person, then you also have your own program. which you, I
Correct.
mean, you were pretty creative and you called it the Progrm.
Like for dyslexic people out there.
What is a spelling error or?
It's quite well. The history of the name is we were going to call it Eltmur.
Oh yeah, Eltmóður.
Eltmur,
Yeah.
which is like it's an old
Yeah.
we've got an Icelandic person, so be careful what I say. But
Yeah, go ahead.
my understanding is that it's an old Icelandic word, and it kind of means like drive within or the fire within.
Yeah.
And so OG days, there was Mikko Salo kind of had his sisu,
Yeah.
which is like the Finnish expression for people who work hard, and that kind of just like drive, not for anything external but something internal. And so during the time I was working with Sara, it's a name that we kind of came up with to express. But we were going to call the program that. But then I go like, it was because when it started, it was fairly underground. We just called it the program.
Yeah.
Then we're going to have this big opening and call it Eltmur. And we're like, we're going to call it what?
Yeah, exactly. Of course.
And in the end, it was just like,
Because I had to like think twice, and I'm Icelandic.
Oh shit.
And so in the end, it just got called. It just stuck to the program because no one could
Yeah.
pronounce the word basically.
Yeah.
And then we needed to find an Instagram handle, and obviously the program was gone, so we just missed an A and like, hey, we'll call it that. And lo and behold,
There you go.
there we go.
That's awesome. That's a good one for sure.
Yeah. So that's kind of the history of the name, but yeah. So that's so there are two forms, and I think a distinction gets made. Like, so with the program, I'm a programmer, and with coaching, like athletes like Jacqueline or so on, I'm a coach. And I think it's an important distinction to make, and because CrossFit's a relatively new sport, I do think that people haven't necessarily separated these two things before.
Mhm.
And it's become quite clear to me over the last few years that I program, and that's kind of a skill in of itself.
Mhm.
And the same with coaching is a skill in itself, and you can be a good programmer, not necessarily a good coach, and vice versa. So I think distinguishing the two is quite useful.
I think it's more than normal. Well, for me, it's normal to distinguish the two because I've never programmed and don't have really an idea how to program really well. But I think I can coach at some level, But so I totally understand what you say. So yeah. But do you think that when you write like sort of the program for the general public, do you think it's actually good to follow a general program for a long time, or do you think that every athlete, when he wants to compete or get serious, that he should actually get an individual program for himself?
So, or to distinguish between general public and athletes. So I think it's just important to distinguish between like general population and then athletes who want to compete in CrossFit. So I think for general population, the big aspect is getting people through the door and start moving. And I would argue that becoming specific to CrossFit is not necessarily advantageous, but just being active in general. Coming to athletes, I do think there are certain aspects important, so that you do have a good program, because it's what you do every day in order to follow, and so you want to be able to have faith that the program that you're following is going to bring you results. It's not going to leave you overtrained. It's not going to miss certain aspects of the sport. And that's an important aspect. And I think the coach's role then comes in modifying and tweaking. So I genuinely believe that you can have a general template, because everyone needs to develop in certain areas, but then the coach should be there to tweak certain things. So I think that a coach is important, but I think an individualized program is something that becomes very interesting. Like a bit of a bugbear is, sometimes you hear about, let's call them programmers just to kind of increase that distinction, but you have programmers who are programming for like 30, 40 people.
Mm-hmm.
That's crazy to me.
Mm-hmm.
Like the amount of hours that we put into writing one program each week is huge. Mm-hmm. So I think what's really happening is actually they're developing a template and then modifying the template slightly for each of their athletes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And
Makes sense.
yeah, and I just don't see that it's actually physically possible that they can truly individually program for all those athletes. They have to have a template in which they modify from. And I actually think that's what can be really useful for a coach, is that actually, you know, here's the general template. Everyone's got faith in that program and that template, but what can be modified is like the athlete comes in and goes, you know, I'm feeling a bit stiff or a bit sore today. You go, okay, well, let's go a bit easier on this part. Or, you know, actually we need to look at we do need to focus on your gymnastics. Let's prioritize this today and then do the other stuff. So it's like actually the template in the program is there, it's done, there's a great foundation there, and the coach's role is almost, you know, then developing that individual in that aspect from there.
Yeah, like highlighting certain things on the program.
Yeah.
And then maybe deciding between skipping or really going after something.
Because the talk we had at the weekend, so one of the things is that specialising in CrossFit, I think, is very dangerous, mainly because you don't know what's going to be coming up. And so really the only time we'd recommend individualised programming is when you have, and we're talking like when you reach the general level of athlete, not from beginners getting to, but when you've had an athlete who's been at like national or international level in a certain area. So say they've got, you know, say they've been an international rower,
like Sam Briggs maybe.
Yeah, exactly. She's, you know, she has won national titles in that regard, or international weightlifter. Say you've got to that level, you've got so far above where you would need to be as a competitive CrossFitter that actually you might personalise things that you don't need the rowing or you don't need the lifting. But for 99% of people who are in the sport of CrossFit, you know, their lifting's not good enough for them to be in the 1%, even though they might be strong. Or their conditioning is not good enough that they're guaranteed to have a win in there. There's an athlete at this year, the Meridian, Jess Toll. She used to be an international triathlete. But, you know, it's quite obvious, like she destroyed the 333 time. She's got great conditioning, great engine. And, you know, for someone like that who's so far ahead in that regard, that actually she could probably justify an individualized program because she can afford to lose so much from her running, her conditioning, to develop her gymnastics and strength. But she's like the 0.1% or 1% of CrossFitters out there. You know, a lot of athletes think that they have good conditioning, but in reality they don't. You know, actually they don't.
Well, you raised an interesting point this weekend, because, you know, we had a seminar this weekend with John, and you were talking about, you know, when athletes see a hole in their game, let's say they feel they're not strong enough. So maybe it's an obvious assumption on their behalf that in order to, you know, be strong enough, they'll focus just on being strong and they'll start neglecting the other things. But you can argue that if you isolate just strength work and you forget about, you know, conditioning, gymnastics, then once you're gonna, let's say you hit your numbers that you wanted to hit, then once you start cycling back into the conditioning and all that good stuff, that strength kind of starts to fade. Is that, I mean,
I think it's very important, and so we often see it happen in strength, and I believe that's because it's an easy metric to compare yourself to others. So, you know, it's like, okay, we did a complex day like power clean and front right lunge, and I know that I hit 110 kilos and then Arna hit 125. So it's very easy for me in that to be like, okay, I'm weak in that comparison. But then if we were to do a CrossFit workout, you know, I finish a bit behind, it can be a lot harder to identify if it's your conditioning, your pull-ups, where you are. And also we see on Instagram all the time, because it's easy to post, like people hitting a heavy lift. And so I think all that happens is people compare themselves to people who are lifting and doing that. But, you know, I can tell you that if you sat on a rower next to Lukas Esslinger, like, your conditioning's not going to be as good. You know, but you think that it's just the strength that's letting me down. And so, and I think it's a very important aspect that people focus too much in on one area at a time and forget the whole picture. Like one of the principles that we talked about this weekend in our kind of our programming style is that we want to see small, consistent improvements over time. And actually, if you have a big jump, it's something that we wouldn't say is a positive, because most likely if you had one big jump in your strength, then actually you've seen other areas suffer, such as your conditioning or your gymnastics.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's important. We've just seen a big trend in CrossFit with strength. And maybe it's been dictated by the events that we have seen. That we have seen 1 rep max snatches or clean ladders in certain areas. So you kind of see the top athletes who hit these big numbers. Then you fail to see how much they run. At the games, like run, swim, run. Try and follow Brent Fikowski. Run, swim, run. Then you'll be surprised how good their conditioning is.
Yeah. Try to follow Tia Claire Toomey.
Yeah, exactly. I've been humbled enough, or maybe unlucky enough, that I've spent, from the very beginning, I've been around like a lot of the games winners, like Sam, Annie back in the day, or Mikko Salo. So maybe I was humbled early on that you realise that when you go train next to those guys, you realise their capacity. But maybe just from social media, you end up just seeing the numbers that they can hit on lifts, and it gives you a bit of a false impression that they're just stronger. But actually, they have better gymnastics, better conditioning.
Yeah, I think you and me share that experience, like being close to world-class CrossFitters and realizing that it's not just strength work. And I mean, maybe in just simple terms, you could say that CrossFit makes you better at CrossFit.
Yes. And
and people forget that actually.
Yeah, it's a simple concept, but actually relatively hard to apply. Like if you think we did the kind of exercise, if you go through all the CrossFit movements that you could expect to see at a competition, the list goes on into hundreds of movements. So it's actually being good at CrossFit requires a large amount of skills. This year's regionals, the only time we get specific and specialise in events is when we know what the events are going to be. So we had 5 weeks this year for the Meridian regional athletes that we had. So they actually had 5 weeks of being relatively specific in their lead up, but that's still, however many movements it was, like 20 movements in total, 15. So you still got 15 movements that you have to be very good at, which if you compare that to other sports, it's like a huge amount of movements that you need to acquire. And then take that to the athletes looking go into the games, how many movements they need to be extremely competent at all at the same time.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, we've kind of tapped into that. You kind of almost caught the wave of CrossFit in Europe. Like you started early, and I remember, like when I went with a team. I wasn't competing, but I went with a team. Annie and our box had a team. Inga, my wife, was competing in 2011, and I was actually a coach of Elvar. Yeah. And so I remember
that event, that final event, very well.
Yeah, at the regionals.
Yeah.
In
Bolton. He killed himself.
Yeah, and qualified for the game.
Yeah.
It's actually an interesting story. So we're talking about a friend of mine who qualified as an individual to the games in 2011. Did you know that he, on the Thursday prior to regionals, he was supposed to go and fly to the UK, but he lost his passport. and he can be a little careless, and little would be an understatement. Especially back then, he was very careless. So I don't think he was even looking for his passport until he woke up that morning. So he realizes that he's not finding his passport, and since UK is not in the Schengen, you need your passport. Yes. So I think he actually went ahead and went to the airport and tried to wing it, as Icelanders would do. And there was computer says no, so he missed the flight, and it looked like actually early on Thursday that he was not going to be able to get a passport and a flight to make it to the regionals. And for somehow, there were some strings pulled, and eventually he got a red-eye flight, so overnight.
Yeah.
And he landed somewhere where he had to drive a little bit. So he got to the air at 6 a.m. on Friday morning. And this is regionals is Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Imagine the 24-hour.
That's epic.
Yeah, and then he makes it to the games. But at the games, so kind of the reason why I brought this up, which was very epic that he made it. But I remember hanging out backstage and with the athletes, and all the coaches were kind of like me, you know, they got coaches pass, but they weren't really coaches. There was no proper, let's say there was not a lot of professionalism with the coaching. Like my role as a coach was mainly to make him laugh and make sure he's got his athlete credentials on, which was actually harder than you might imagine. Like he forgot his phone on the bus to the beach, and it was terrible. Anyways, so the only one actually was Annie, and we were kind of also her entourage, but she had Yami, and she had even Carl Paoli, and he brought in Brian McKenzie, and so there was a lot of like professionalism there. I mean, she went on to win the game. It's not just because of that, but I think then the ball started rolling with the high level athletes that they would have like coaches on. Yeah. And you kind of caught that wave. One could argue that you've coached some really impressive athletes at the games.
You know, I think that's true. I mean, first, I wouldn't. I'd say the quality of being able to make an athlete laugh in that environment is actually very important, and actually quite an important skill, especially in a CrossFit competition where it goes on for days, and you're bound to have ups and downs. You know that's going to happen. But I also do think that there are certain principles that we know that can help to enhance performance. But we also know that, as you say, like going through the basic checklists are like extremely important. Is your athlete there for briefing? Mm-hmm. And these simple things that athletes aren't always great at.
No.
That role of a coach is it can be actually making sure that have they eaten after an event? Like, have they turned up for briefing? Like, are they wearing? They've got a 1 rep max squat clean. Have they got their belt and their knee sleeves?
It's sort of being a parent, actually. That's what you are.
Yeah, and I actually made that so. The one thing I realised, I don't have kids, but I presume that when you make the move from an athlete to coach, it's like making the move from, child to parent.
Yeah.
Because all of a sudden you realise that, strangely in a way, you're not the most important part here, and everything that you then do is for the benefit of your athlete. And so you have to become very selfless. You have to understand that I know it's kind of the theme. Like I do give everything. Like I'm not very good at just doing something halfway. And the same with the athletes that I work with. Like you put a lot of yourself, and you really try and help them and embody them, and kind of just get them the best that they can be. But it's about getting them the best that they can be. And so it's a very strange distinction between making you the best you can be to making someone else the best that they can be. It's like an interesting switch around. Yeah.
Do you think this, because athletes are not all stupid. Like it's almost like they're missing their briefings. They don't have a belt. Would you tie this into the fact that just doing a competition that can be very stressful and long just occupies so much of your mind that you start forgetting the basics?
That's very true. Like, I don't think athletes should have to worry about those things. So I think that's an important point, is actually the athlete's concern should be getting onto the field and executing what they need to execute. I can't remember who this is quoted. It's actually from one of my friends. I've got a good friend called Josh, who I've known since I was here. We practice martial arts together, and I've known him for years. He's now a very successful businessman. And he said, you only have a certain number of effective decisions that you can make in a day. And, if you start using all those decisions on the minor things, then actually for the bigger things, you don't have that brain power and that capacity. Yeah. And so, he'd take it to the point where he has someone pick out the clothes that he's going to wear for the day. He takes things to slight extremes as well. But I think it's the same for the athletes. If they're thinking oh man, have I got my food prepared? Have I got to think about my knee sleeves? All these little stresses combined over that many events and that many days add up to a stressor. Whereas if they can just have faith, okay, I'm going to rock up, all I need to do is think about the competition floor, and I can be 100% there. Like I know that all of the worries, all of the concerns are taken care of, then I can just 100% give all of my focus to being there. And I think that's very useful skill. You know, it's not athletes are people, like some are more organised than others. But you know,
could you give us an example of an unorganized athlete?
Björgvin is probably the most classic. Like it's 2015, and you can't imagine. So we're in the Carson, and it is like fucking crazy hot. Like midday sun, Carson just dying, and it was just after the Murph event. Now,
which he won.
Yeah, exactly. So he won Murph, which was just this like crazy thing. Because the backstory to that, we were actually in Costa Mesa, CrossFit Costa Mesa, and it's quite a famous gym in Los Angeles, in California. And we'd actually been doing it with like Dan Bailey had been there, and we literally done Murph as it was going to be at the games like a few weeks before, in weight vest, etc. And like, Dan crushed Björgvin. Like, you know, Björgvin's so far behind. And anyway, like rocks up on the day, and like there's so many funny stories at 2015. But one of the things, you know, not being organised, a classic. Like basically, we had a chef who was looking after the house, but then the chef moved out the day before the games, and so it's like me, Eric, Björgvin, Snorri, and staying in the house, and it's like we didn't like have anything for breakfast. So we were like fuck. So we like drove to this venue and went to this like American diner, and Björgvin got like hash browns, cheese, extra bacon, coffee, and like running late into the venue, like basically puts on his weight vest, goes in, wins Murph. It's like this like epic story that is just great to say.
Proper breakfast.
Yeah. But we so after Murph, like it was like a war zone.
Yeah.
Like people were just being brought back into the athlete area.
Yeah, it was bad.
Stretchers, like
I remember,
with IV drips. People like died. It was like literally they'd gone to war and were being brought back. It's crazy.
Where Carol Webb actually fainted, right?
Yeah.
But,
and Annie.
Annie too.
Well, she got like overheated.
I tell you, like everyone was done. The games could have ended at that point. But Björgvin comes back, right?
Yeah, I was in the ice bath and Björgvin comes back.
So he's got his his weight vest on his shoulder, and then just dumps it in the middle of the ground. Like, I just go get something to eat. Okay, great. And then so they're cleaning up the whole area. So like the event team that come after, like clean up the whole warm-up area, and everyone's resting. And I'm like going out, just looking around, and I see this one thing in the middle of the floor. Like everything else is completely clean apart from Björgvin's weight vest. And he just like, but it wasn't even like an organised way. He just dumped it in the middle of the floor and then just walked off.
Awesome.
Yeah, I remember because I was competing on the team this year, so we had finished a little bit earlier, and I was in the ice bath, and then he comes and like everyone was looking like terrible after Murph.
Yeah.
I'm like, dude, what happened? And he comes like just chilling, and I'm like, how did it go? Yeah, I won.
He did so well. Like he that year was I was so happy for him that year. You know, like to take third. And you know, relatively out of nowhere was pretty epic. But I remember the teams that year as well, because it was your first event in the bar muscle-ups deadlifts.
Oh, that was the first event on the second day.
Okay, and your hand, like the athlete's hands.
Yeah.
Whoa! Like everyone's hands had just been like completely destroyed. It was horrible.
Yeah, I remember.
The skin was completely ripped off of everyone.
I was good. So then we are 2015. What do you see kind of things going with?
I honestly don't know. Like, so on another side of the athlete's perspective, you know, kind of onto our perspective as coaches, is like how is this world financed? You know, like a lot of the athletes, so only 50% of the individual athletes going to games will make any money.
Yeah.
By any money I mean a little bit of money. the other 50%, who are your 40 best in the world, male or female, are not going to make anything and actually going to lose money by going to the games.
Yeah.
So they're paying for the experience to be the best in the world. And obviously that means that, like, your support team that you're talking about, you know, unless you have someone, you know, someone like myself who is passionate about going and will fund myself to go there, do all these things, like, you know, you don't have that support team there. And I think a lot of teams, a lot of individuals as well, get to games and be like, where's the big sponsor? You know, where's the money going to come from? And it's, you know, it's like, I suppose a bit of a harsh truth is that, you know, sponsors really do just care about the best in the world. You know, if you're like 15th in the world to a sponsor, it doesn't give them the publicity they necessarily want to see. They do want to have the best in the world, and that makes it very hard to finance your life. You know, like, you train all year, you say no to job, you don't work, you do all these things, and it's like, then all of a sudden you've got to pay the bills. You've made it to the games, which is great. Then you get back from the games, it's like, well, I've just spent thousands and thousands of dollars to be at the games. You know, I've worked my arse off, I've achieved something great, but actually on the other side of that, I've still got to pay my rent when I get home. So I honestly don't know, like, if all of a sudden it gets divided into like a World Series or something that allows, you know, something that's more attractive to sponsors, because realistically, you know, like the Nike, the Under Armour, the Reebok, they are the people who can afford to make the sports, like, give it a bit more depth, really. Yeah. Because they have the financial backing in order to do so. You know, there's lots of interesting things happening, like what's going to happen with Reebok when their contract runs out. You know, there's like a question that people are starting to ask, and I'm sure some people know the answer to that, but, you know, if Reebok pulls out, where's the prize money going to come from? Or will Nike get on board? I presume not. Or will Under Armour? It's just going to be an interesting... When Reebok leave, I think there'll be a slight change in the structure, I presume, unless Reebok stay on with the same kind of terms. Because realistically, that's where all the prize money is seemingly coming from, is that sponsorship deal. Yeah. So from an outsider's perspective, it's very hard to know what's actually happening there. But, you know, it'd be nice to see, you know, I suppose more competitions, more exposure for athletes, etc., so it can kind of help grow the sport and help grow the support networks of the sport as well.
But don't you feel like it's still on the climb? I mean, meaning it's the sport of CrossFit and the games. Do you feel like it's saturated or it's reached its peak, or is there still potential to, you know, to get more money to the athletes? Because, you know, and a lot of it is TV rights. I mean, if it becomes a viewable and an interesting sport for the general public, then they can sell the broadcasting right.
Yes. But, you know, where does that money go then? You know, it's like, does that money then make it to the athletes? You know, do the athletes all of a sudden start getting paid to go to the games? So what was the name of the tennis coach?
So Arnaud?
Yeah. So we had a tennis coach on this weekend, and, you know, so if you make, you know, and obviously the selection and the spectatorship is a lot greater in tennis. Yeah. But if you make it into the competition as like an individual at the French Open or one of the big Grand Slams, you automatically guaranteed 35,000. Yeah. So it's like, if you make it to that stage, you know you're going to get paid, and then you're on the tour. So what, you've already made like $120,000 to $200,000. So, you know, then you can afford to. You don't need the big sponsorships necessarily, but you can afford your coaching team. You can afford to have good nutrition. You can afford to not have the financial worries. You know, whereas in CrossFit, you're going into minus, and so something does have to be changed. You know, to be able to support the athletes in becoming financially independent to some regard. And I don't have an answer or no. It's just you know, it's quite apparent that you can't support full-time. The majority, the 99% of elite athletes can't be supported currently. They have to do, you know, full-time work or at least part-time work. There are very few athletes who are making significant money from CrossFit.
Yeah, and that's just, I mean, that's the pinnacle.
Yeah,
I
the
mean,
Annie, the Sarah, the Katrin,
Yeah.
the Fraser, the Froning, you know, the people who've done well, and even someone like Kalipa, who, you know, he hasn't made his money from CrossFit directly. He'd made money from developing his name, and so there are people who do extremely well like that. But then you need to have a very different mindset. Like you're not an athlete, then you're a businessman, and it's just a very different quality that you need to possess.
Yeah, I think. I mean, there are a lot of athletes out there that have let's say, the following, or have the potential of having a good following, and then they can, you know, make something of it. Meaning they have to kind of hustle, you know, to go out there and get those sponsorships or create something and then sell it and all that stuff. So, but they still have to work for it. I mean, we're still at that level.
But the thing is, the whole thing you're saying about CrossFit in that sense is applied actually to many sports. So if you take the sport of swimming, for instance, it's the same thing. So even if you're a really, really, really high level swimmer in the world, you're still not going to make a lot of money.
Yeah.
Yes, and I suppose that is the discussion of like, how do you take the sport of CrossFit into those zones of the higher paid sports?
Exactly.
I think MMA is like a good model, but you know, I do have like friends in like GB judo squad. Okay, so and like, you know, live on the judo hall. They make like zero, like they make
negative money.
Worse than, you know, it's a worse life than CrossFit. So that is a good point, that there are other sports that are, you know, that are worse fun. I'm sure weightlifters can testify.
Yeah, they might
to
just
that.
be less viewable in a sense. They're less viewable sports, so automatically it's less attractive to sponsors, as you say. And I mean, it's in a way it's sad, because if you consider, like, often it's exactly these sports where people train like crazy. Like, if I say take the swimmers, they train like, it's amazing how much they train. And the same with CrossFit. I mean, if you want to compete, I mean, you know, you have to train a lot, and you put a lot of effort in it, and you don't get anything out of it. Even if you're, as you say, one of the 40 best in the world, you know.
And I think one of the things that excites me is being able to see athletes who like have a huge potential. You know, like, is there someone who can beat Fraser out there? You know, and I think those people start to get attracted into the sports, you know, by the higher prize money, by the fame, by the spectatorship, because it draws more people in. It's like that, like, self-fulfilling prophecy. Like, you get a big enough audience, you start to get more people coming in to compete, and because of that, more people coming in to compete, the competition gets more fierce, you have to be better, and then you start really realizing, like, you know, okay, they are like, that's the potential, that's where we can go to. And the same with boxing. It's like, you know, if boxing wasn't as famous or as big, I'm sure the level that you need in order to be great wouldn't be as high as it is now. You know, like, with boxing, you like, those athletes are phenomenal, and it'd be nice to see the same with CrossFit. Like, you know, is Fraser phenomenal, or is there someone who out in this population who could be more phenomenal?
Do you think Fraser is touchable
this year? I think the kind of thing with Fraser, like, if he wants to win it, he can. Like, if his mindset's in the right place. We were talking about earlier, I think it's very hard for athletes to make jumps in potential. Like, athletes, when you get to a certain age, you kind of reach a certain level of potential, and then to make a then step up is very impressive. And I think that's what's the most impressive about Fraser, is like, he made a notable step up. Like, from the last 18 months or so, he's just like became untouchable. Whereas before, you know, he was being beaten at certain things, but now it's seemingly like he is untouchable.
Who do you think, if you put your money on someone that, you know, is kind of a familiar name with CrossFit, but is making that step up, meaning they're gonna do really well this year?
The obvious ones at the moment are the Russians. Like, you know, this Roman. You know, it excites me, you know, like, nobody all of a sudden wins Europe, you know, destroys, like, the big names of Europe. Who knew Roman, you know? And now he's going to the games, and that kind of excites me, you know, like, this unknown comes in and just suddenly beats it. It's like, it makes the sport exciting. is he going to be able to perform at the games? Is he going to not? All those questions that get asked that make the sport exciting. So it'd be interesting to follow the Russians at the games. I think Jason Smith was a great example last year. Like, hadn't made it into the games, has a good regionals, makes it to the games, comes top 10.
Yeah.
Makes it into the invitational team, which I think is a good, it's a good goal for a lot of the European, and I presume now Meridian that they'll include into Team Europe. It makes it a great goal for them is to try and make it one of the best 2 males to be in that team. The only athlete I would say that I know of that can currently compete with Matt Fraser is Janikowski.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Even though he's not competing?
Even though he's not competing, he's the only athlete who I believe that could beat Fraser at his current level.
Wow.
Yeah. Koski's like a phenomenal athlete. If he had consistent training, he has like injuries and various things that flare up, but he's probably been like 4 years that followed him in his career, and like I said, I'm lucky enough to speak with the athletes personally, and he is an athlete that I would, if I had to put my money on someone being able to beat Fraser, Koski would be that person. It's a shame he's not competing this year, kind of coming back from knee surgery. But yeah, he's the one I'd put the money there.
That's interesting. I mean, he is the one that wears the leader's jersey just because they have the swim and a lot of the conditioning events early on.
Yeah, his strength lets him down, but with the scoring system, being able to win events is really the crucial. Like Brent Fikowski, like he can get really high because he can win events.
Yeah.
And so this scoring system favours him down to the ground.
What about the female side?
Mm-hmm. Like I said, I think Tia is it looked extremely impressive. It's like crazy that she can win the Commonwealth Games.
Yeah.
Win the games, win her regional. She won her regional comfortably, and last year Cara Webb destroyed her.
Yeah, it's hard to bet against Tia at the moment.
Yeah, Katrin, I said before, I think Tia can have a bad games and win the games, whereas I think the other girls can win the games, they just need to have a great games. So in that lineup, obviously Annie's always a threat. You've then got Sarah, who's got physical potential. She's changed things around a lot this year, so it'll be very interesting to see how she can perform. Cara Webb has always been one of my favourites to win. Camille's a phenomenal athlete if she comes in fit and healthy. And there's always that unknown, like Tennille Reid impressed last year.
That's true.
Yeah. Do you think Annie is making that jump that we were talking about, like kind of rebounding back to the top?
A rebounding maybe, but it's an interesting one. Has Annie made? Is the Annie significantly better 2009 or whenever her first game was to 2018? I think it's hard to say. I think she's always been one of the top athletes, and that's what's been interesting about Fraser is that significant jump. Froning has always been phenomenal. Okay, came second in his first year, but then he was a step above from the start.
Yeah.
And I think that's what becomes interesting is the athletes that people are physically talented, but can you be physically talented and then improve on that? Who makes those big jumps and those big step ups in games? Tia's a phenomenal athlete, but 2-2-1 is not a step up. It was just one. It wasn't she's won. So if this year she comes in and goes 2-2-1 dominance, then that's something that's a bit different. If she just wins again, it's not really a step up, if you see what I mean. She's just she's maintained her more or less, and certain things stack in her favour.
It's a bit like when Katrin won the second time, she just won slightly over Tia, so that's what you meant. It was just it's not a step up for Katrin at that point, it's just winning again.
Exactly.
It was really slight.
And I think that's what's interesting to see. Roman has had a huge step up, and that's what is interesting.
Where was he last year?
I think 300th in the Open.
Oh wow.
yeah.
So I beat the guy last year.
Yeah.
There's a lot of guys that
You're
have
damn
beat.
good, man.
I think that's why it was interesting for Björgvin. Like that third place was a step up.
Yeah.
No, so Björgvin had a step up where Sara was in her first year at the games and came third.
Yeah.
And so that they're kind of those interesting distinctions. Like, where have you come from to get to where you are now?
Mm-hmm.
And it's quite easy to, the athlete, like the Ben Smith of the world, has always been there or thereabouts for all those years, and he's a phenomenal athlete.
Yeah.
It's like, how does someone like Ben Smith then go from that to being able to consistently win the games?
Mm-hmm.
Or Scott Panchik.
Yeah.
There's many names that you start to see in the sport that are there for years and years, and in that mix, in the and depending on events, they might finish in a certain way. But that's the interesting thing for me, is how do you then take someone out of that grey area or that range that they're in into the next zone? That's like a very interesting way, and so that's quite a bit. I suppose what excites me is that aspect of it, being able to be like, okay, how do we take you to the next stage?
But I mean, it must be hard, like with Scott Panchik being at, I think, top 6 at the game, or like 6th or 5th for 5 years in a row.
It's crazy.
It's crazy. But for him to make that jump must be extremely hard then.
Yeah.
Or do you think it'd be a good idea for him to maybe take a step back?
Well, and this becomes the interesting question. It's like, so he's already extremely good.
Yeah.
He's one of the 5 best in the world consistently over all these years. So he's a great athlete.
Yeah. But he's still not satisfied.
Yeah. Well, exactly. Because everyone in that zone, a lot of people get to the games and are happy to be at the games. But then if you're pushing top 10, you kind of want to win the games.
Yeah.
And so I presume, I don't know Scott Panchik, but if we take a typical athlete in that zone, you would predict that they want to win the games. And so he's there every year doing that. And so it'd be an interesting project, how can we make someone who is great and consistently great like Scott Panchik take it to the next level? And it's an interesting question to ask. The question, there's obviously the point, can you? Because he's obviously doing a great job at the moment. So it'd be like, what do you have to change? Like, what aspects would he need to implement? Is it something physical? Does it fit more into the mental capacity? Is it something like nutrition? Is it something simple? Could he change his lifestyle situations? I have no idea, but it's an interesting question to ask.
Is there always something to improve on? Or can you look at an athlete and say, okay, we're doing, he's reached his top potential?
There's always something to improve on. If that makes a difference is the interesting point. So it's like, I can improve someone's pull-ups, but is that gonna give them enough of a percentage difference in order to make that step up? So they might get a little bit better, but is that little bit better significant? And so that's the interesting point. Is there's always something to improve. You can sleep better, you can eat better, you can train smartly, you can do certain things in different ways, you can move better. The interesting question is that the component that you're missing in order to make that step up? And I think finding that, is it an aspect of everything? Is there just one thing? There's kind of the interesting journey and exploration in this game, really.
That's good. Last question, John.
Okay.
Where's John in 5 years?
Ooh, man. I thought this was not going to go deep.
Oh, we went there.
You're used to saving this stuff. Well, I think if I listen to my boss, who is Jacqueline, it's going to be not as much travelling and settled down.
Yeah.
So, my life is very much in a backpack, as Adrian knows, picking up my stuff from the airport.
He's got his whole life in 3 big bags.
Well, I have my life in half of one of the bags, and Jacqueline holds the rest.
Yeah, you got that small backpack.
Yeah, exactly.
I kind of envy you.
Yeah, it's one of those lifestyles. I do very much enjoy it. You have to enjoy being on the road and a certain level of unpredictability about knowing where you're going to be and where you're going to be staying. But in 5 years' time, I've always liked the idea of settling down somewhere quiet. and I've never had a desire to own like a typical gym for regular members, but I know I really enjoy working with athletes and high level athletes, so maybe those two areas collide. And we'll see. Like, the honest answer is, where will I be? I don't know. I kind of have ideas of where I'd like to be, and there'll probably be some significant changes in terms of the way I'm conducting my life at the moment, which is like way too much travel to find a base and be a bit more settled.
Yeah, maybe bring people more to you.
Yeah, so that would be the idea, and that kind of comes with its advantages and disadvantages. Like, you have to deal a lot more with the athlete dynamics and the politics and the like. Is this athlete happy with this athlete? And so all those dynamics come more into play when you bring a group together. Athletes can sometimes, just like people, it can be tricky to bring a group of athletes together because they all have their different personalities, and accommodating each one who then wants to feel special in that environment. So it's like all those little dynamics that you have to work. The hope is to try and do it the best way possible, which is why I'm hesitant about doing anything at the moment, because I kind of want to explore different areas.
It's cool.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Nah, that's good. Awesome.
It's good. Thanks for joining.
It's a wrap.
Well, thank you for having me on, guys.
Yeah.
Our pleasure.
Beards and fitness.
Beards and fitness. Yeah.
That's
That's
good.
it. Cool.